The Ghost of the Crimson Reef. The year was 1944. At the heart of the base lived Sergeant Elias, Stitch Thorne. Elias wasn't a pilot, and he wasn't a gunner. He was a rigger, the man responsible for the massive, complex parachutes and the fabric-covered wings of the scout planes. In a world of steel and fire, Elias worked with silk, needles, and heavy-duty thread. The heavy silence of the Pacific life at Fox 3 was a grueling test of patience. The heat was a physical weight that stayed on your shoulders from sunrise to sunset. The men lived in canvas tents that breathed with the wind, and their days were marked by the daily three: the morning scout flight, the midday heat nap, and the evening wait for the radio to crackle. The soldiers often joked that they were the forgotten battalion. They were thousands of miles from the front lines, yet every man knew that if their tiny airstrip fell, the entire supply chain to the Philippines would snap like a dry twig. "Does it ever get to you, Stitch?" asked Miller, a young pilot who was watching Elias meticulously inspect a parachute. "Knowing that if you miss one stitch, I don't come home?" Elias didn't look up. He ran his fingers over the silk, feeling for the slightest snag. "I don't think about you falling, Miller. I think about you flying. My job is to make sure the falling part never happens." The night of the red horizon. One humid Tuesday, the sky turned an eerie shade of bruised purple. A massive tropical storm was rolling in, but that wasn't the only threat. A distress call came through the radio. A transport plane carrying wounded soldiers and vital medical supplies was caught in the storm's eye, its navigation dead. The pilot was blind, spinning in the clouds just miles away. "We can't see the island. We're at 500 feet and dropping," the radio screamed through the static. The base commander looked at the runway. The heavy rain had knocked out the electrical generators. The floodlights were dead. The island was a black shadow in a black sea. "We have to light that strip," the commander shouted, "or they're going into the reef." The gamble of the Silk Elias knew the fuel was too wet to light in the rain. He looked at his supply shed filled with rolls of white parachute silk and gallons of highly flammable dope, a lacquer used for plain fabric. "Help me," Elias yelled to the men. He didn't wait for an explanation. He began dragging long 100-foot rolls of white silk onto the muddy runway. He laid them out in two perfect parallel lines. Then he grabbed cans of the flammable lacquer and drenched the silk. It was a desperate move. If a spark hit too early, Elias would be caught in the middle of a firestorm. But he kept running, pouring the liquid onto the silk as the wind tried to tear it away. "Fire it!" Elias screamed as he dived into a sand trench. A flare was shot into the silk. In an instant, two massive, brilliant white walls of fire erupted along the runway. The burning silk cut through the rain and fog like a glowing neon sign. The landing from the cockpit of the transport plane, the pilot saw it a glowing V of fire in the middle of the dark ocean. He banked the heavy plane, lined up with the burning silk, and brought the aircraft down. The wheels hit the coral with a bone-jarring thud, skidding through the mud and fire, finally coming to a stop just feet from the water's edge. The wounded were safe. The medicine was delivered. The morning after, when the sun rose, the fire was out. The runway was covered in charred, blackened remains of what used to be beautiful white silk. Elias sat on a crate, his hands covered in soot and small burns, watching the mechanics work on the transport plane. Miller, the young pilot, walked up to him. He looked at the ruined silk, and then at Elias's bandaged hands. He didn't say thank you. Instead, he took off his own silver wings and pressed them into Elias's palm. "I told you I don't think about falling," Miller said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I'm glad you were thinking about the landing." The war eventually passed Fox 3 by. The base was dismantled, and the jungle grew back over the coral. But for decades after, the men who survived that night told the story of the rigger who turned his silk into a lighthouse, proving that even in a war of machines, it's the human thread that holds everything together.